Okay, so after the death of 17-year-old Trayvon Martin and the George Zimmerman not guilty verdict, you could almost hear the roar of conversations about race relations. Obviously, we still have thorny problems facing the African-American community, a lot of issues facing not only that community, communities around the country, but this is what we're talking about specifically. I say now is the time to talk about solutions. So here's just two for my no talking points special that I'm going to talk. As a young people, pull up your pants. Saggy pants can mean saggy self-esteem. I said African Americans, stop using the N-word, entertainers and rappers. I meant that for you as well, because I think you're deluding yourselves when you say you're taking it back. There's Anna and there's LZ. They're both back. Okay, so, you know, LZ, I'm going to start with you. Your son, obviously you're African American. You have a son, you have a child. Let's just talk about this particular point. What the saggy pants?
You know, my son tried to leave the house once with saggy pants. This when he was years and years ago, because he's a big fan of Lil Wayne. Lil Wayne wears saggy pants, and I stopped him and I sat him down, and I did sort of what you did yesterday, which is let him know where that came from. I think context is the most important thing, and understanding the historical background, even on cultural or fashion phenomena, is very important. So once I told him that was born out of the prison system and what some of the different height of the pants meant, it was very clear to him that this was not something that he wanted to represent. And instead, what he does, his fashion statements now are different kind of flashy belts. His pants stay up. I'm happy. He feels like he has self-esteem. His self-esteem is up. But more importantly, he's still allowed to express himself creatively without linking himself to the prison system.
I don't understand what. Listen, correct me if I'm wrong. You guys don't have to agree with me. I didn't. When I asked both of you to talk about this, I said you don't have to agree with me. In fact, I don't want to know what you think. What is wrong with telling people to dress appropriately? These are things that I said yesterday, that my mom taught me in kindergarten, that parents tell their kids in kindergarten. Dress nicely, speak well, speak appropriately, and on and on. What, Anna, I mean, am I wrong here? What's going on?
I don't think there's anything wrong with what you said yesterday. In fact, I was amazed when I retweeted it that I got so much Twitter hate. You were getting it, and I got it for having retweeted it. And I think, look, you know, there's people who call you in to schools, Dawn, and call you in to go speak to youth and to groups and tell them how you succeed. We are here on this panel, three minorities, two African Americans, one Latino, who have succeeded, and there's advice to be given. And success is not going to be reached by not speaking English correctly, even though I do have an accent and I butcher it every now and then. It's not going to be reached if we don't give some tough love to our own communities. If we don't offer this constructive criticism coming from a place of love and a place from the heart and sincerity, then who is? So I would say, you know, take it as that. Take it as very sincere, heartfelt words coming from an African-American man who is proud of his culture, proud of his race, wears it with pride, loves it, wants to defend it, but wants to see others also succeed.
Yeah, and that doesn't mean that racism doesn't exist. We're not stupid here.
Right.
We talk about, let me just say this. And not that I'm defending what I did. Since the beginning, we started talking about this, week one of the Zimmerman trial, we talked about, is there a bigger conversation to be had on race in this country? You can put those guys back up. Week two, we talk about the N-word. I did a special on the N-word and other racial slurs. And then week three, I talked about black manhood on trial. And it was shortened because we had that plane crash, remember? And then week four, we had the Zimmerman verdict and the reaction to that. And then week five, just last week, I talked about the generation gap, and I talked about entitlement. And then I talked about profiling as well, and I talked about privilege as well. Did I not have those conversations on the air about privilege and about racism and about profiling and about having been profiled? I mean,
you absolutely did, and I think I think the Trayvon Martin trial is an opportunity for us to have the deep discussions we need to have. Let's not talk about each other. Let's talk to each other and also within our own groups. And let's remember that it was during the Trayvon Martin trial that the Paula Deen scandal happened. And I can tell you that I think a lot of people were saying to themselves, well, gee, you know, how come Paula Deen can't say this word, but how come it's being said just a few days later in the Trayvon Martin trial by an African American? It's a hateful word, it's a hurtful word. We should all stop saying it, not because it's politically incorrect, but because it's incorrect, period.
And LZ, listen.
Well, I mean,
wanna
it's
talk,
complicated.
Yeah. Well, hang on. I'm going to get to that. I'm going to let you. I'm going to let you
Okay.
talk. I'm going to let you finish, LZ. So,
Okay.
I want to talk about this because I mentioned we were talking about the N-word and taking it back, and I played a clip of Jay-Z, I played a clip of Chris Rock, and I did the N-word special, and I said, should I be telling people that? And then I got off the subway, and I told this story yesterday about this little boy who was walking with his mom. She was crying, he was crying, and she said, stop all that crying, you act like an old-ass man, you stop all that crying, nigger. And someone on Twitter, it was one of the things I read this morning, because I didn't read my timeline until this morning. I didn't read it last night, or when I got to work this afternoon. And I said, hey, he's a child. You know what she said to me? Mind your business, N-word. And I said, would you like me to call DCFS? That's a child you're speaking to. She went to a deli on the street, grabbed an umbrella, and threatened to hit me with it. And so... is that taking back the N-word? Do entertainers really think they're taking back the N-word when you have parents calling their children that name? And that's not a loving name when they're doing that. Is that taking back the word?
Well, again, everything is about context. You know, we cannot pretend as if this word exists in a vacuum and that there's no connection to history to it and there's no connection about different meanings in the black community. I know, you know, there are gay men who call each other the F word. There are women who call each other the B word. Everything is about context, and sometimes when you're outside looking in, you may not necessarily interpret the context right. But with that being said, I can only speak to what goes on in my house. And in my household, we don't use that word. And I explained to my son why and why we don't and how he should view other people who do. Not judge them like they don't know any better necessarily, but understand that everyone has a different relationship with that word than you do. I mean, there are people that I know who are my friends who are Puerto Rican who use the N-word. And, you know, if you don't have the full context of what's going on with them, you're going to be confused as heck. And so I try not to get so caught up in the N-word. I try not to get so caught up into sagging pants. I just explain to my son what the expectations are in my house. But with all that being said, we cannot keep pretending as if there aren't any sort of ramifications or residual effect that happens when you walk around the streets with your pants sagging saying the N-word. You're not going to get hired in a high-power position job. You likely are not going to be accepted at some prestigious university. I severely doubt you'll be able to get a decent date with anyone worth loving if you spend your entire time dropping the N-word and you can't keep your pants up.
But you know what you sound like right now, don't you?
Like a reasonable human being?
No, you know the name. You know the name they call you. They call you Uncle Tom. I'm taking that word back.
I've
been called Uncle Tom so much. I'm taking that word back. I'm going to get the Uncle Tom award.
Every week, Don, I go between.
I thought you were going to call him a Republican.
And Uncle Tom. Oh Lord, no anything but that.
Oh my gosh.
I go back and forth between being called a racist and being called an Uncle Tom. What I like to call myself is a factivist. I just like to stand up for the facts. And the fact of the matter is that there are things that we can do in the African American community to make our situation better that has absolutely nothing to do with white people. And there are things that happens to black people because of the residual effect of hundreds of years of slavery and the byproduct of all the subtle racism that has happened and impacted our community. We can have those two conversations simultaneously. They're not exclusively mutual.
We're making this a very black-centric conversation, but those 5 pieces of advice you gave yesterday, Don, can apply to everybody, including to my community, including to whites and to just everybody who's growing up. You know, educate yourself, speak well, look well, keep the place where you live clean. If anybody's got trouble with you giving that kind of advice to youth out there, I just don't know what to say to that.
I don't either. And listen, it's not really necessarily always about pulling your pants up. It's really just about respecting yourself and then realizing, you know what, I can either, and I said this, people said, you know, Don, you don't know where we're coming from. You're wealthy, you're on television. That's not true. I didn't grow up with a silver spoon in my mouth. Actually, my mom and dad were not married. I dropped out of college at one point, and I had to decide whether I was going to stay stuck or if I was going to soar, and I decided to soar in the face. And I had been profiled many times, talked about that. But you have to make a decision at some point that you are going to be better than your surroundings or your circumstances. And that's all I was saying in that no talking points. And